breaking the Nintendo monopoly, and also Monopoly. It's Segaiden episode 65.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Double Dragon, Toil, and Flagon? That doesn't work, but let's try this one. It takes two to make a thing go right. Or, in the case of Double Dragon for Master System, it takes two to have a literal fighting chance to see the third level of the game. Double Dragon for Master System is a land of contrasts, really. On one hand, Double Dragon for Master System really puts Double Dragon for NES into perspective. It throws the massive changes that Technos made for NES into high relief. In arcades, Double Dragon more or less created an entire genre, the multiplayer belt scroller, by tossing two people into the thick of a scrum, forcing them to work together in order to fight through mobs of bad guys who only knew one language, the language of fists. The appeal of this mindless walk and punch action was enhanced by the fact that two friends, or siblings, or rivals could team up to work through the mobs simultaneously. Technos Japan stumbled upon a fundamental truth that would reshape the games industry forever. Stupid, mindless action games turn out to be infinitely more entertaining when they involve two people being stupid and mindless together. Heck, Double Dragon was so appealing that you could even look past the utterly god-awful frame rate and slowdown. I'm not a stickler about frame rates and slowdown, but good lord, the Double Dragon arcade game really pushed the limit for what the public would tolerate on a technical level in a game like this. I think pretty much any other game from that era would have inspired riots if it had performed like Double Dragon. But in a game where you and a friend, or sibling, or rival could cooperatively beat 7 flavors of hell out of a bunch of big dumb thugs with a variety of team-up moves and secret skills, the experience felt so fresh and appealing that even the syrupy movement couldn't prevent the action from feeling thoroughly entertaining. Inspired by films like The Warriors and manga like Fist of the North Star, Double Dragon built on the framework of Taito's Renegade in remarkable ways. Renegade featured a single schoolboy brawling his way across Tokyo, employing kicks and punches and hair pulls and jump attacks. All of those elements reappear in Double Dragon, along with many more. You can perform spin kicks, reverse elbow smashes, and wield weapons dropped by your opponents against them. And, again, you can do it all with the help of a second person. The NES version of Double Dragon featured a bizarre creative choice. It dropped support for the second playable character. If two people wanted to play Double Dragon, they couldn't do it together. They had to take alternating turns. This was a weird and off-putting decision. Double Dragon sold largely on the appeal of its team-up concept, and I can speak from personal experience when I say that its loss in the NES release disappointed a lot of people. It did have its own merits, though. Technos reworked that release to make up for the absence of simultaneous cooperative play by leaning into the role-playing trends of the late 1980s. Billy Lee, now the sole Double Dragon protagonist in absence of his brother Jimmy, continued to fight his way through environments that largely copied the beats and enemy patterns of the arcade game. But the levels were expanded to emphasize more platforming elements. The caves of the third stage became an infinitely looping maze, akin to World 8-4 of Super Mario Bros. And the enemy hideout of Stage 4 demanded precision platforming and a canny understanding of edge detection. On top of that, Double Dragon for NES forced Billy to earn his abilities. Players began the game with no skills besides kicking and punching, and new combat techniques would become available as players earned experience by pummeling foes. By the end of the game, Billy could perform all of the same techniques as in the arcade game, but you had to work up to that level of combat. It was an interesting concept, though not necessarily a perfect one, and it makes the NES version of Double Dragon a truly unique entry in the franchise. Double Dragon for Master System wants none of that. Sega commissioned Arc System Works to port Double Dragon to their 8-bit console, and Arc decided to stick to the original text. On Master System, Double Dragon includes everything anyone could have expected to see in a home port of the game. For starters, it does indeed offer simultaneous cooperative play. Two players can join in together and rumble through a post-apocalyptic gangland world in order to rescue a lady named Marion. Billy and Jimmy Lee kill a lot of men, women, and lumpy giants named Abobo in order to rescue Billy's lady friend. At some point, you'd think that the evil shadow boss would just call it a day and let Marion go, but evidently he's fallen for the sunk cost fallacy and just keeps tossing minions at the two brawling brothers. Then again, his legions of warriors don't fight nearly as fairly here as they did on NES. The Sega version of Double Dragon doesn't just play like the arcade release in terms of tandem action, it also plays every bit as unfairly as the coin-op machine. I guess the principle here is that because you don't have to go it alone, the CPU can afford to be deeply unfair. The enemy AI in this Double Dragon works almost exactly like in the arcade game, and bad guys have the same attack priority over Billy and Jimmy. The bad guys will make every effort to flank you, with one foe approaching you directly while others attempt to circle around you and attack from behind. This is almost comically predictable behavior on their part. The second or third enemy on screen will always avoid coming at you head-on and try their best to get behind you. But it's only comical until they succeed. Once enemies flank you, you're pretty much trashed. Double Dragon on Master System captures the imbalanced difficulty level of the arcade game. Technos really did balance the NES release for single player, and in part by making the shadow bosses' flunkies a lot less ruthless. The NES game made them less tactical, give them lower attack priority, and tuned their attack patterns to be less likely to land a hit while you're recovering from a previous blow or picking yourself up off the ground. Only a handful of enemies, notably the final bosses, behaved more like their coin-op counterparts, while the rest operated with something akin to sportsmanlike conduct. Arc System Works saw the wildly unbalanced design of the arcade game and said, yes, we need to recapture that precisely. And they did. This version of Double Dragon is deeply unbalanced, just like the arcade machine. The thinking behind Double Dragon's balancing probably went something like this. If you played alone, you deserve to die. If you played with a friend, you might deserve a slim chance of survival by standing back-to-back to fend off flankers. That same philosophy makes itself seen here. If you play solo, you really have to cheese the game in order to avoid becoming overwhelmed, spamming jump kicks, leading or misdirecting the AI, and so forth. Unlike in the arcade, you can't just pump quarter after quarter into Double Dragon until you win. Here you have only 3 credits, and that's it, game over. I have no doubt that it's possible to beat this cartridge solo, but it doesn't seem like it would be a lot of fun, since it involves manipulating the CPU through specific behaviors. But hey, maybe I'm wrong, and if so, the commenters will tell me all about it. Really though, this version of Double Dragon appears to have been crafted just like the arcade game, as a strictly cooperative experience. And that's fine. It's what Double Dragon should be. Don't let the NES-style character redesigns fool you. This was the closest thing you could find to a perfect home port of Double Dragon in 1988. That alone makes it interesting. For all that you hear about Nintendo's monopoly on third-party licenses, here's the first example we've really seen of a multi-platform console release for the US that takes a totally different angle than its NES counterpart. The NES game takes a more adventure RPG-style approach, while the Master System release is definitely arcade-like. That neatly sums up the two consoles' creative direction for 1988, turning Double Dragon into a sort of litmus test for console consumers. Do you want the arcade experience or the solo adventure? Your choice speaks to which console better suits your needs as a whole. It's a brawler and a personality test all in one. Speaking of Nintendo's monopolies, here's a game they didn't monopolize. It's Monopoly. Or, if the label is to be believed, Monopoly. It's a board game plus a lifestyle and sexuality choice. It's also a Sega exclusive, at least for the next few years. The NES version of Monopoly wouldn't arrive until 1991, giving Master System a genuine edge over the NES on this front. This might be one of the few times that Sega's decision to go with Tonka for distribution in the US genuinely paid off. Tonka licensed the rights to the Monopoly board game from Parker Brothers on Sega's behalf, making use of those industry connections to get the deal done. And the timing of this cartridge release couldn't have been better. Monopoly has always been a sort of American institution, what with our country's collective love of stabbing others in the back for a shot at monetary wealth. But 1988 might have been the peak of Monopoly fandom here in the US. McDonald's, the restaurant, had teamed up with Parker Brothers the year before to launch a nationwide sweepstakes that encouraged customers to peel little reproduction game piece tabs off their drink cups in order to win instant prizes and potentially create entire real estate property sets for even larger rewards. This game, as it turns out, was quickly manipulated by criminal scammers and went wildly awry. But at the time, we didn't know that. And McDonald's Monopoly was a massive phenomenon that turned out to be even buzzier and more popular in its second run in 1988. Master System Monopoly landed right in the middle of that mania, and Nintendo didn't have a ready counter for such a lively, on-trend video board game adaptation. Anticipation ain't it. And Sega put a lot behind this cartridge. Co-developed by Sega and Nexa Corporation, the company responsible for the original version of F-16 Fighting Falcon, but don't hold that against them, Monopoly is the second Master System cartridge to include an onboard battery backup feature. It's also the first Master System release to support 10 players, a feat achieved by passing the controller, as in NES Double Dragon. There was never a 10-player adapter for Master System. Sega fans would have to wait until Saturn Bomberman to get one of those. This also ties into why I've been dragging my heels on covering Monopoly and have kind of fallen out of the chronological order of releases. Honestly, I find it to be one of the most tedious and drawn-out board game concepts of all time, and the fact that the cartridge supports 10 players and includes a battery in order to save games in progress means that Sega went to great trouble to preserve this tedium in silicon form. That's a hard pass from me. The idea behind Monopoly is to dice roll your way around a board that represents Atlantic City real estate. You use your limited funds to pay for properties and utilities. When you land on a space that no one else owns, you have the option to purchase it. If someone lands on a space you've purchased, they have to pay a fixed amount of rent in order to remain there. Otherwise, they're penalized by being sent to jail for a turn. On top of that, you can choose to upgrade the properties you own a couple of times, which requires greater capital outlay, but also means that you collect more rent from occupiers. Money is one of the greatest stressors in modern society, so a game about struggling to make ends meet and sending other people to jail for not being able to pay their rent isn't exactly my idea of lighthearted escapism. But I suppose there are plenty of dead-eyed, avaricious sociopaths who get a kick out of this. Well, you sociopaths will be happy to know, inasmuch as the deadened husk of your soul is capable of feeling joy, that Sega and Nexa did a damn good job of capturing the horrors of Monopoly here. It's got all the spaces, all the pieces, and plays through a handy menu interface that does a great job of laying out all your possible actions for a given turn right up front. It makes a great counterpart to Double Dragon. Not only do both games offer Sega fans something lacking on NES, but Double Dragon is the perfect game to play with friends, while Monopoly is perfect for people incapable of feeling the subtle emotions that lead to friendships. Both Double Dragon and Monopoly received full-page features in the Sega Challenge newsletter. Now, at this point, you should know better than to expect those to have been meaningful coverage, but it does at least show where these games appeared in the pecking order of Sega releases. Next time on Segaiden, Master System masters the way of the samurai.